Did you know that the single most dangerous day for your tomato plants might just be the day you put them in the ground? Welcome back, fellow gardeners. Today we are talking about a magic date that everyone waits for, May 15th. For millions of people, this date signals the official end of frost and the ultimate green light to start planting. But here is the shocking truth that nobody tells you at the garden center. Planting your tomatoes after May 15th without knowing the specific late spring rules is a guaranteed way to lose exactly half of your potential harvest. Yes, you heard that right. Half. I am going to reveal exactly why the traditional advice you have been following is actually setting your plants up for failure. By the end of this video, you will have the ultimate insider knowledge to grow the biggest, juiciest tomatoes on your block. But I am curious, do you usually rush to plant your garden the moment the weather gets warm, or do you wait? Let me know in the comments, and let us see who the real risk takers are. Before we dive into the mistakes, we need to understand why this specific time of year is so incredibly tricky. Historically, gardening almanacs and great-grandparents have always pointed to mid-May as the safe zone. The threat of winter frost is finally gone. The birds are singing, and the garden centers are overflowing with beautiful green tomato seedlings. It feels like the perfect time to build your dream vegetable garden. But tomatoes are originally tropical plants from South America. They are dramatic, they are sensitive, and they demand very specific conditions to thrive. The transition from a cozy, climate-controlled greenhouse to your unpredictable backyard in late spring is the most stressful event in a tomato plant's entire life. The sun is getting intensely hot during the day, yet the nights can still be surprisingly chilly. This extreme swing in the environment is a recipe for disaster if you do not know how to manage it. So, let us break down exactly what goes wrong and how you can avoid a complete gardening heartbreak. Let us dive right into the first major issue, which is confusing warm air with warm soil. So many gardeners step outside on May 15th, feel that beautiful 75-degree breeze on their face, and immediately grab their shovels. But here is the sneaky truth about late spring weather. Just because the air is warm enough for shorts and a t-shirt does not mean the ground is ready for tropical plants like tomatoes. Tomatoes absolutely hate having cold feet. If you drop a delicate tomato root system into soil that is sitting at 50 degrees, the plant goes into immediate thermal shock. It will just sit there, shivering in the dark, completely stunted for weeks. By the time it recovers, you have lost a massive portion of your growing season. The common myth here is that the sun heats the earth instantly. In reality, soil is incredibly dense and takes weeks of consistent warm nights to heat up properly. A perfect illustration of this is a deep swimming pool. The first hot day of summer does not make the pool water warm, right? The soil works exactly the same way. To avoid this massive harvest killer, you must use a soil thermometer. Poke it into the dirt about 4 inches down. You are looking for a consistent temperature of at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit before you even think about planting. If the soil is too cold, lay down some black plastic mulch for a few days to trap the solar heat. Moving on to our next critical error, let us talk about planting depth. If there is one rule you must memorize for tomato planting, it is this. Never plant a tomato seedling at the same depth it was growing in its nursery pot. This is perhaps the most widespread mistake beginners make after May 15th. When you buy a tomato plant late in the season, it is often tall, leggy, and desperately reaching for sunlight. If you just dig a shallow little hole and pop it in, that tall, weak stem will snap in the first strong spring thunderstorm. Here is the fascinating biology of the tomato plant. Its entire stem is covered in tiny, fuzzy little hairs. Every single one of those hairs has the magical ability to turn into a thick, strong root if it touches the soil. The myth is that burying a plant too deep will suffocate it. For most plants, that is true, but tomatoes are the grand exception. You want to pinch off the bottom 2 sets of leaves and bury that stem deep into the earth. You can bury up to 2/3 of the entire plant. By doing this, you are creating a massive, deep root system that can anchor the plant during high winds and reach deep underground water reserves during the scorching heat of July and August. So, dig deep, or even plant them sideways in a trench, and watch your plants explode with vigorous growth. Now, let us discuss a very tempting trap: the nitrogen overload. It is May 15th. You are excited, and you want your baby plants to grow into absolute monsters. So, you dump a massive handful of high-nitrogen chemical fertilizer right into the planting hole. Stop right there. This is a catastrophic mistake that will destroy your harvest. Here is what actually happens when you give a young tomato plant a nitrogen energy drink. The plant says, "Wow, look at all this food. I am going to grow leaves." And it does. It will grow into a massive, lush, beautiful green bush. Your neighbors will be so jealous of your giant green plant. But guess what? You will not get any tomatoes. Too much nitrogen signals the plant to focus entirely on foliage production, while completely ignoring flower and fruit development. The myth that more fertilizer equals a better start is completely busted here. A great example of this is feeding a child nothing but pure sugar before bedtime and expecting them to sleep. It is the wrong fuel at the wrong time. When planting in late spring, your tomatoes need phosphorus and potassium to establish strong roots and prepare for blooming. Use a gentle, slow-release organic fertilizer specifically balanced for tomatoes. Bone meal is fantastic for this stage. Save the heavy feeding for much later in the season when the first fruits are actually starting to form. This brings us to a crucial step that impatient gardeners skip: neglecting the hardening off process. Because the weather feels so wonderfully warm after mid-May, people assume the plants are ready for the great outdoors immediately. You bring your lush green seedlings home from the store, take them out of your car, and stick them straight into the bright afternoon sun. Within 24 hours, those beautiful green leaves will turn white, crispy, and transparent. Your plant has just suffered a severe case of sunburn. The glass roof of a greenhouse blocks out the harsh ultraviolet rays of the sun, and the walls block the brutal spring winds. Your seedlings have been living a pampered, sheltered life. They have absolutely no defense mechanisms built up. The myth is that warm weather means safe weather, but ultraviolet radiation and wind are invisible enemies. To fix this, you must harden off your plants over a period of 7 to 10 days. On day 1, put them outside in complete shade for just 2 hours, then bring them back inside. Every single day, gradually increase their exposure to direct sunlight and wind. It is exactly like a pale person getting a base tan before going on a tropical vacation. Skip this step and your plants will be so stressed they might never recover, costing you half your fruit. Let us talk about timing. Specifically, the time of day you choose to plant. It is Saturday afternoon. The sun is shining brightly, and you finally have free time to get your garden sorted. So, you start digging holes at high noon. This is a massive mistake when planting after May 15th. The midday spring sun is incredibly intense. When you take a plant out of its protective pot, its roots are briefly exposed to the air. If you do this while the sun is beating down and the temperatures are peaking, the plant loses moisture faster than it can possibly absorb it from the new soil. This leads to immediate and severe transplant shock. The plant will wilt dramatically, lying completely flat on the ground, fighting for its life. The best analogy is running a marathon in the desert without drinking any water. To avoid this completely unnecessary trauma, you should always plant your tomatoes in the late afternoon or early evening. Or, ideally, choose a cloudy, overcast day. Planting at 6 o'clock in the evening gives the plant an entire cool, dark night to settle into its new home, heal its microscopic root hairs, and take a deep drink of water before the blazing sun returns the next morning. This simple shift in your schedule guarantees a smooth, stress-free transition for your future harvest. Moving on, we need to address how you handle the roots during transplanting. Many gardening books tell you to aggressively tear and massage the root ball of a plant before putting it in the ground to encourage outward growth. While this might be great advice for a tough perennial shrub, doing this to a delicate tomato seedling in late spring is a terrible idea. When you pull a tomato plant out of a nursery pot, you will see a network of fine, white, fragile roots. If you rip those roots apart with your fingers, you are destroying the plant's only method of drinking water. In the warm weather of late May, a tomato plant needs to drink immediately to survive the heat. If its roots are torn and bleeding, it cannot hydrate. The myth that you must break up every root ball is dangerous here. Instead, treat that root ball like a fragile glass ornament. Unless the plant is severely root-bound, meaning the roots are circling the pot in a thick, dense mat, you should barely touch them. Gently squeeze the sides of the plastic pot, slide the plant out, and place it directly into your prepared hole with as little disturbance as possible. The less you mess with the roots, the faster the tomato will establish itself and start growing those big, delicious fruits. Another massive harvest killer is forgetting to mulch immediately after planting. After spending hours digging and planting in the warm, late spring weather, it is very tempting to put the tools away and say, "I will mulch next weekend." Do not do it. Leaving the bare soil exposed around your freshly planted tomatoes is a huge error. First, the warm May sun will bake the bare dirt, evaporating all the precious moisture your new plants desperately need. Second, and much more dangerously, bare soil is a breeding ground for fungal spores. When the spring rains come, or when you water with a hose, the water hits that bare dirt and splashes muddy droplets right onto the lower leaves of your tomato plants. That mud carries early blight and septoria leaf spot, which are terrible diseases that will quickly travel up the plant and destroy it. The myth is that mulch is just for making the garden look pretty. In reality, mulch is a critical medical shield for your tomatoes. An excellent example is wearing boots in a muddy puddle to keep your pants clean. Immediately after planting and watering, lay down a thick 3-inch layer of organic straw, shredded leaves, or clean grass clippings around the base of the plant. This locks in the moisture, keeps the roots cool, and prevents that fatal splashback of disease. Let us talk about the way you water your newly planted tomatoes. It is a hot evening in late May, and you decide to cool your plants down by spraying them with a hose from above, getting all the leaves nice and wet. This is perhaps one of the fastest ways to ruin your tomato crop. Tomatoes are incredibly susceptible to fungal infections, and fungi need exactly 2 things to thrive: warmth and moisture. By spraying the leaves of your tomato plants in the warm spring weather, you are creating the perfect humid environment for diseases to explode. The golden rule of tomato care is this: water the soil, never the leaves. The roots are the only part of the plant that actually needs to drink. Think of it this way: when you are thirsty, you do not pour a glass of water on your head. You drink it through your mouth. Your plant's mouth is strictly underground. You must use a watering wand, a drip irrigation system, or a soaker hose to deliver water directly to the base of the stem at the soil level. Keep the foliage as dry as humanly possible. If it rains, you cannot control that, but you should never artificially wet the leaves. Changing this one watering habit will drastically reduce the amount of yellowing, diseased leaves you see later in the summer. Here is a mistake that causes physical damage to your plants: delaying the installation of support structures. When you plant a tiny little 6-inch tomato seedling on May 15th, it looks so innocent. It is standing straight up, and it seems silly to put a massive metal cage or a tall wooden stake next to it. So you tell yourself you will add the supports next month, when the plant gets bigger. This is a fatal flaw. In just 4 weeks, that tiny seedling will be a massive, sprawling monster. Under the soil, it has grown a huge, wide network of thick roots. If you try to jam a wooden stake or wire cage deep into the ground in late June, you will hear a terrible ripping sound. You are literally severing and crushing the plant's established root system. This massive root damage will immediately stunt the plant, cause flower drop, and severely reduce your harvest. The rule is simple. The support structure must go into the ground on the exact same day you plant the seedling. It does not matter how ridiculous a huge cage looks over a tiny plant. By putting it in on day 1, the roots will naturally grow around the wire or wood, remaining completely safe and undisturbed. Plan for the giant plant it will become, not the tiny baby it is today. Now we must discuss the silent killer of tomato harvests, poor crop rotation. You had a fantastic tomato patch in the corner of your yard last year, so naturally you want to plant your new seedlings in the exact same spot this May. Stop right there. Planting tomatoes in the same soil year after year is a guaranteed path to declining harvests and rampant disease. Here is the dirty little secret about soil. Pests like nematodes and diseases like blight actually overwinter in the frozen soil. They sleep there, waiting for you to plant their favorite food again. When the warm weather of late May wakes them up, they will immediately attack your new, vulnerable seedlings. Furthermore, tomatoes are extremely heavy feeders. They suck very specific nutrients like calcium and magnesium out of the soil. If you plant them in the same spot, they will starve in that depleted dirt. The myth is that fertilizer alone can fix this. It cannot. You must practice crop rotation. Never plant tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, or potatoes in the same spot more than once every 3 years. Move your tomato patch to a completely different area of the garden, where beans or lettuce grew last year. This simple geographical shift starves the overwintering pests and gives your plants fresh, nutrient-rich soil to feast on. Let us talk about spacing, or what I like to call the jungle effect. When you are standing at the garden center in May, those little green pots look so small. It is incredibly tempting to squeeze 10 plants into a tiny raised bed to maximize your yield. But planting tomatoes too close together is a terrible error. When tomatoes are crowded, they compete fiercely for sunlight, water, and nutrients underground. Nobody wins that battle. Even worse, tight spacing completely destroys airflow. Remember how we talked about fungal diseases loving humidity? If your plants are crammed together like sardines, the morning dew will never dry off their leaves. The center of that thick green jungle becomes a stagnant, damp swamp where blight and powdery mildew will spread like wildfire from leaf to leaf. The myth is that more plants equal more fruit. The truth is, 2 properly spaced plants will produce significantly more tomatoes than 5 cramped, diseased plants. You must give your tomatoes room to breathe. Indeterminate varieties need at least 24 to 36 inches of space between every single plant. It will look ridiculously empty when you first plant them, but trust me, by July, they will fill every inch of that space, and the vital breeze will keep them healthy. This next mistake is incredibly common, but wonderfully easy to fix: leaving the lowest leaves touching the soil. When you plant your tomato deep into the earth, as we discussed earlier, you might have some lower branches that are resting right on top of your mulch or the dirt. You must absolutely remove these immediately with a clean pair of pruning snips. Why is this so important? Because the soil is full of bacteria and fungi that are completely harmless in the dirt, but deadly if they get into the plant's vascular system. If a leaf is physically touching the wet soil, it acts like a bridge or a highway for those pathogens to march right up into the plant. It is like leaving the front door of your house wide open in a bad neighborhood. Furthermore, bugs and pests use those touching leaves as an easy ladder to climb up into your canopy. Once the plant is securely in the ground, carefully snip off any branch that is within 6 to 8 inches of the soil line. You want a clean, bare main stem at the very bottom. This creates a critical air gap that prevents soil diseases from splashing up, stops crawling insects in their tracks, and improves air circulation around the base of the plant. It takes 10 seconds to do, but it saves months of heartache. Let us address the panic watering mistake. Late May can bring sudden, intense heat waves. The temperature spikes to 90 degrees, and you look out the window to see your newly planted tomatoes wilting and drooping in the afternoon sun. Panic sets in, and you run out with the hose to soak them completely. You do this every single day because you are terrified the heat will kill them. But here is the secret. Afternoon wilting is actually a totally normal, natural defense mechanism. The plant droops its leaves to reduce surface area and minimize water loss during the hottest part of the day. As long as the plant perks back up once the sun goes down, it is absolutely fine. If you panic and overwater them every single day, you will drown the roots. Tomato roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. If the soil is constantly soaking wet mud, the roots will literally suffocate and rot away. The myth is that hot days automatically require daily watering. The best way to check is to stick your finger about 2 inches deep into the soil. If it feels dry down there, give them a deep, slow watering. If it feels moist, step away from the hose. Overwatering in late spring kills far more tomato seedlings than underwatering ever will. Here is a hidden technical mistake that ruins harvests before they even begin. Ignoring your soil's pH level. After May 15th, everyone is focused on temperature and sunlight, but almost no one looks at the actual chemistry of their dirt. Tomatoes are very particular about their acidity. They want soil that is slightly acidic, ideally with a pH between 6.0 and 6.8. If your soil is too alkaline or too highly acidic, a terrible phenomenon occurs called nutrient lockout. You could have the richest, most expensive compost and fertilizer mixed into your garden, but if the pH is wrong, the tomato plant's roots physically cannot absorb those nutrients. They are locked away. This is the absolute leading cause of blossom end rot, where the bottoms of your tomatoes turn black and mushy. The plant cannot absorb calcium because the pH is wrong. The myth is that you can just add crushed eggshells later to fix it. Eggshells take years to break down. You must know your pH before you plant. Go to any hardware store and buy a cheap $20 soil pH test kit. If your soil is too acidic, add some garden lime. If it is too alkaline, add some elemental sulfur. Adjusting this invisible factor will unleash the true growing power of your tomatoes. Moving on to a mistake made right at the garden center checkout line. Buying seedlings that already have yellow flowers or tiny green tomatoes on them. It is so tempting, is it not? You see a plant that is already producing and you think you are buying a magical head start on the season. But planting a flowering tomato after May 15th is actually a huge setback. Here is why. When a plant is flowering or fruiting, it is pouring 100% of its biological energy into reproduction. It is trying to grow babies. But when you transplant it into your garden, what it really needs to do is grow roots to survive the shock of moving. If the plant is focused on flowers, it will neglect its root system. The plant will stall. Those early flowers will probably drop off anyway due to transplant shock, and you will be left with a weak, stunted plant. The brutal truth is, if you buy a seedling with flowers or fruit, you must ruthlessly pinch them off with your fingers before you plant it in the ground. Yes, it hurts to destroy those early blossoms. But by removing the flowers, you force the plant to redirect all its energy downwards into building a massive, bulletproof root system. A plant with strong roots now will produce 10 times more fruit later in the summer. Let us talk about the shock of cold water. It is a beautiful, warm spring day. You have just planted your tomatoes, and now it is time to give them their first big drink. You turn on the hose, and freezing cold water blasts out from the underground pipes. Spraying 45-degree water onto the warm roots of a freshly transplanted tomato is a massive biological shock. Imagine sitting in a hot sauna, relaxed and warm, and someone suddenly dumps a bucket of ice water over your head. Your muscles would instantly cramp up. The delicate root hairs of a tomato plant react exactly the same way. The sudden drop in temperature causes the roots to constrict, completely halting their ability to absorb water and nutrients for days. This cold water shock stalls the plant's growth right when it needs to be establishing itself in the new soil. To solve this, you need to temper your water. Fill up your watering cans or buckets in the morning and leave them sitting out in the warm sun for a few hours before you use them. Letting the water warm up to the ambient air temperature ensures that when you finally pour it over your plants, it feels like a gentle, warm spring rain, keeping the root system relaxed, open, and actively growing. Another missed opportunity that acts as a mistake is planting tomatoes completely alone, skipping companion plants. Many gardeners clear a huge patch of dirt, plant only tomatoes, and call it a day. This is creating a monoculture, which is basically ringing the dinner bell for every specific tomato pest in your neighborhood. Hornworms, aphids, and whiteflies will easily find a giant block of unprotected tomatoes. By ignoring companion planting, you are missing out on free, natural pest control and flavor enhancement. The myth is that other plants will steal nutrients from your tomatoes. While some weeds do, specific companion plants actually help them. When you plant your tomatoes this May, you must plant French marigolds and sweet basil right at their base. The strong, pungent smell of marigold leaves naturally repels nasty root nematodes and confuses flying insects looking for the tomatoes. Basil is even better. Not only does its strong scent deter thrips and flies, but scientific studies suggest that growing basil right next to tomato roots actually improves the flavor of the tomatoes themselves. Plus, you get fresh basil for your summer pasta. Do not leave your tomatoes isolated and vulnerable. Give them a defensive bodyguard of herbs and flowers. This leads us right into the mistake of ignoring early pest inspections. Because the plants are small and freshly planted in late May, gardeners often assume pests have not found them yet. You plant them, walk away, and do not really look closely at them for a few weeks. But late spring is exactly when the first wave of aphids and spider mites hatch in the warming weather. These tiny vampires will attack the newest, most tender growth of your small seedlings. If you do not catch them early, they will multiply exponentially. 100 aphids this week becomes 10,000 aphids next week. The common mistake is only looking at the top of the leaves. Pests almost never sit in the bright sun on the top. They hide in the shady, protected undersides of the foliage. Every single time you walk out to your garden to check the soil moisture, you must physically flip the leaves over and inspect the bottoms. If you see tiny green specks, which are aphids, or fine webbing, which indicates spider mites, you must act immediately. Do not wait for a massive infestation. A simple spray of organic neem oil or just a strong blast of water from a spray bottle can knock them off and save your young plants from being sucked dry before they even have a chance to grow. Let us discuss the missing element in the planting hole: calcium. We touched on blossom end rot earlier when discussing pH, but the actual physical presence of calcium is just as critical when planting. A very common myth and mistake is thinking that tossing a few crushed eggshells from your breakfast into the hole on planting day will provide enough calcium for the season. Let me debunk this right now. Eggshells are fantastic, but they take months, sometimes over a year, to break down in the soil enough for the plant to actually use the calcium. Your tomato plant needs calcium right now to build strong cellular walls in its stem and leaves. If you rely on fresh eggshells, your plant will suffer a calcium deficiency exactly when it starts trying to grow heavy fruit in midsummer, resulting in those disgusting black bottoms on your tomatoes. To avoid this, you need a fast-acting calcium source on the day you plant. A handful of bone meal or a specific tomato fertilizer fortified with highly soluble calcium should be mixed deeply into the soil at the bottom of the planting hole. This ensures that the rapidly growing root system immediately encounters usable, available calcium, guaranteeing perfect, blemish-free tomatoes later in the year. Our final massive mistake is treating all tomato plants exactly the same, specifically regarding pruning. Gardeners often read an article about pruning tomatoes for better yields and start happily snipping branches off every plant they own. But if you do not know the difference between determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, you could literally cut away half of your harvest with one snip of the scissors. Indeterminate tomatoes are vines. They grow endlessly until the winter frost kills them. They require aggressive pruning of their side shoots or suckers to focus energy on the main fruit clusters. However, determinate tomatoes are bush varieties. They are genetically programmed to grow to a specific height, produce all their flowers at once, ripen their fruit, and then die. If you take your pruners and cut the suckers and branches off a determinate tomato plant, you are physically removing the exact places where the plant was going to grow its fruit. It will not grow new branches to replace them. You will have a tiny, neat little bush with almost zero tomatoes on it. The absolute rule is this: keep the plant tag. Know exactly what variety you bought. Prune the wild, indeterminate vines, but never, ever prune a determinate bush tomato. Just let it grow wild and support the heavy branches. And there you have it, the ultimate breakdown of exactly what goes wrong when you rush out to the garden after May 15th. The truth is, all of these mistakes compound on each other. If you plant in cold soil, tear up the roots, and then blast the plant with cold water, it does not matter how much fertilizer you use, your plant is doomed. But now that you possess this insider knowledge, you hold the power to completely transform your gardening season. By simply checking your soil temperature, burying those stems deep, watering only the base, and providing the right nutrients at the right time, you are guaranteeing yourself a massive, explosive harvest that will have your neighbors begging for your secrets. Gardening is all about working with nature, not against it. Thank you so much for watching and learning with me today. If you found this video valuable and want to grow your best garden ever, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and share it with a friend who loves tomatoes. Now, I have a question for you to answer in the comments below. What is the most frustrating gardening mistake you have ever made, and how did you fix it? Let us share our stories and help each other grow. Until next time, happy planting!